What to do, y'all? This is Chris Evanson. This is Talking Data and More, and I'm super excited to switch up the content and the flow and have my very first guest on Talking Data and More. So without further ado, let me introduce you all to data engineer extraordinaire, Max Kang. What to do, Max?
Hey, Chris. Nice to be here.
Awesome, Max. I'm super excited to have you on. You know, Max, for the folks that don't know who you are and your data superpowers, can you give a brief introduction on those data superpowers that you have, enabling companies to be data-driven?
Yeah, sure. I don't know about superpowers, but I'm currently a data engineer with WeWork. Previously, I worked as a data management and analytics consultant, worked with Chris a bit on a couple of different projects, including some data warehousing, some data management, and some advanced analytics project both as a tech lead, as a data architect, as a sales engineer, in many different roles. So yeah, like my expertise lies in basically the entire data lifecycle from beginning to the end, from the data architect side to the actual building out of data pipelines to data management and analytics.
Yeah, and Max, I would totally agree. You are the person of many hats, and I've been very fortunate to have the experience to even work with you in the past, love the different hats, And, before we get into it, I have to ask you, with my love of comics, anime and all that, and as you can see in the background, you got to tell me, who is your favorite comic book character, anime, cartoon, and why?
Yeah, I would say probably Iron Man is probably my favorite character. Like as an engineer, he was like, he's not born with any superpowers, it's more relatable, I guess, coming from engineering background. Besides the whole him being very rich part, But yeah, I think it's just very cool character, like how he built himself to be a superhero, right, rather than being born with it.
That's awesome. I love Tony Stark, and I think that's a great superhero for you. As you mentioned, unfortunately, you're not a billionaire like him, but definitely on the tech side, and as smart as Tony Stark is, I would say that relates with you. And just like how Tony Stark is a brilliant mind, he is Iron Man. He's doing a lot to save the world. Those are his superpowers. A data engineer such as yourself has those superpowers. You are making organizations like WeWork data-driven, right? But for the folks that don't know, can you talk about the role of a data engineer or the data engineering team and the value they bring to organizations to really be data-driven? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think the field of data engineering has grown really tremendously in the past decade with the growth of volume of data, right, and different types of variety of data and velocity of data, like the whole big data movement, right? So the role of data engineer at the core is to design and build data pipelines, right, that enable the organizations to basically connect and leverage all the data that they have at their disposal in a nice, easily usable way. So if you think about all the cool data projects that every organizations are doing currently, right? You could think of data engineers as being the foundation that provides them the frameworks, right, and the tools and the warehouses to power those initiatives, whether it be from BI initiatives or data science, AI, machine learning initiatives, right? Data engineers help provide the foundation for them to build on top of it.
And Max, your point is core, right? We know data is worth more than gold, and you need those frameworks. You need those data pipelines. So that's great that, the data engineering team and the data engineers such as yourself are bringing that value to the organization, right? So that's awesome right there. Just to expand on that, because you have a vast amount of expertise, right? And so what makes a good data engineer, especially nowadays when organizations are constantly challenging? You mentioned value, the variety of data. I mean, it's just difficult. What makes a good data engineer nowadays?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question and a valid one. So as I mentioned, data engineers are in high demand and like every like data-driven organization needs a good data engineer. And I think what really differentiates a good data engineer is their like data architecture and modeling is probably like the key like skill set that differentiates them. So currently, like as like a lot of you guys know, right, there are a lot of different tools out there, right, different types of systems, infrastructures, right, and it's just constantly evolving field. But the actual like concepts behind the data architecture and modeling, I think that's the crucial, the most significant skill set that data engineers have, right? So some components behind like a good data architecture and modeling, right? You need to know the different types of data, right? Where they're coming from, how they're stored, right? How in like which formats, and how like quickly they're coming in, right? In terms of volume, variety, and velocity. On top of that, you also need to know the actual domain of the data itself, right? It's like, I think crucial in order for you to do a good data modeling, that you actually have a domain knowledge of the data itself, right? So whether it be a specific industry or specific services, right, that data is coming from, right? It's important that data engineers are intimate with the actual data itself. Yeah, and basically given using those like architecture and modeling knowledges, right, being able to model the end product, right, the data warehouses, data lakes that are easily, like, it can be used easily, right, and flexible enough to be used in a wide, in wide different use cases across the org and across different teams.
And that's a great point. And you mentioned understanding the data domain, the architecture. So if you had to start off, if somebody wanted to start off in data engineer, where would be the first step to get them to becoming a data engineer? What advice you would give? Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think for one, I mean, SQL, I think it's just given, right? Like everyone knows SQL, but obviously being a data engineer, right, you have to be very comfortable with SQL. And from there, I would say definitely a lot of discovery and exploration, right, into the source data, right? And that will give you, that will give you the domain knowledge that you would need to be able to model it properly, right, for the warehouses and data lakes. And from there, just getting into more of the actual practice of integrating different data sources. That's key feature, right, of developing data pipeline, right? Being able to integrate different data sources that we have, right? Especially these days, right? It's not just gonna be, like a SQL databases as a source, right? You're gonna have a streaming data sources, you're gonna have unstructured data sources, right? IoT data, whatever the file or the data type might be, right? You need to be able to connect all those dots together or different data sets together. So I would say that's probably a good starting point. And then as you get more familiarized with the whole process, right, just try to like hone in on best practices, right, and the actual best practices around modeling, around developing the pipelines, et cetera.
Yeah, and I love how you talk about like connecting the dots, and that's the most difficult piece, and even drawing that bigger picture from the architectural, following the best practices and processes. So that's great that you hit on that. And we hear a lot too, I think especially my colleagues who maybe are not as technical, they get confused with an ETL developer and a data engineer, right? So from your experience, you've been very fortunate based on your experience working those different types of roles as an ETL developer, as an architect, as a data engineer. You've had that experience to work those, especially those main two roles. Can you talk about, the differences and why people think they're the same, right?
Yeah. So I think ETL developer, like the title or the role of ETL developer, has been around for a long time. And it has traditionally, been used for, ETL developer for a professional who use ETL tools to basically create data warehouses or data marts, other downstream, data stores. So I think currently, right, data engineer, I think is still relatively new, but like very like rapidly evolving field or a group of professionals. So I would say currently ETL developer is a like subset of data engineers. So at the core of it, right, the main, I guess, component of being a data engineer is to develop ETL like data pipelines, right? So that portion of the like job description, I guess, is still the same. But I think data engineer, there are additional components that got added as like part of the job, I guess, description for data engineers. And that includes, you know, these days being able to like develop that infrastructure platform, right? So especially with the different types of tools and like systems that, you know, deal with data these days, right? There are a set of like data engineers that are solely like, you know, developing on like data platforms, like making sure the organizations have the tools and infrastructure behind, like being able to process, like store, right, ingest, and basically create the data pipeline needed, right, for that end product. And then there are also some portions of like data engineering engineers are responsible for like analytics and BI focus these days as well. So yeah, in those cases, like data engineers are working very closely with the end analysts, right, or data scientists, right, to create either, you know, the BI infrastructure or the actual BI visualizations, as well as maybe like the feature stores that the data scientists or machine learning engineers might use. So yeah, overall, I would say currently ETL developer is subset of like data engineers, but the just scope of the jobs, right, that the data engineers are responsible for has grown like more than what ETL developers used to do.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with you too on that statement, Max. I look at it as the ETL developer is the person building out just the pipes, when the data engineer, which is perfect for you, is again, with many hats, right? Building out those pipes, understanding the business challenges, putting together the solution, the architectural, the design. So I totally agree with you. And I think that is why that data engineer, the data engineering team is so relevant and important for organizations, again, to be data driven, because they are the person with many hats. Too bad I don't have as many hats right on now. So.
Right.
That's awesome. And, you know, you talked about the role of the data engineer and the importance that it brings to an organization. Can you elaborate and talk about some of the challenges that a data engineer is faced? Because as you mentioned, there's a lot of stuff that data engineering has to do. Building out the pipes, putting together the design and architecture, developing that end product for the customer, understanding data by domain. That's a lot. So what are the biggest challenges a data engineer faces today, whether that be the business, building, speed, or et cetera? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the answer to this question like has been the same for the past, whatever, couple of decades or however long like databases or data systems have been around. I think it's always going to be like data quality and data governance. It's always going to be like one of the biggest challenges of a data engineer, being a data engineer. So especially like with the amount of data that we have and like different types of data, different types of systems that we're bringing data from, right? Data quality and data governance, I think it's going to be even bigger of an issue and of difficulty challenges, right, that data engineers are going to face going forward. And like a lot of times, right, like many people expect data engineers like to be able to clean up everything on the back end, right, and provide that like nice, shiny, clean, you know, like all like nice looking data warehouse on the back end, but it's actually a lot more than that, right? Like you need like proper strategy, right? And strategy around like data governance to make sure that is the case. You want to have the correct data lineage, right? Being able to track where the sources are coming from, right? And being able to see how the data gets transformed at each stage of the data pipeline. And yeah, I think it's like not a lot of people like get this, but like it's really like resource intensive and time intensive to clean and have that like data quality practices implemented. Of course, you still have to get implemented on the back end. So like in terms of like data governance practices, it's always good to be like proactive, right? Being able to have that kind of like validations, right? Making sure the input data, right, from the source, right, is clean to begin with. Sometimes it's not possible based on the system, right? But those kind of like strategies and implementations, right, working with your other like software teams, right, to implement those kind of validations up front is always like a good practice, and it's always going to be a challenge for data engineers, I think.
Yeah, I would, again, agree with you. And as I talk to more and more customers, they're bringing that up. Understanding what's available, as you mentioned, lineage, the governance is super important, what's out there. Data quality, everybody hates dirty data. We talked about it. I talked about it in other videos. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and like...
And then the other...
Sorry, yeah. So I think the other part is like, with the data like governance, right? Just with the amount of like, with the effort of like a lot of organizations to try to like democratize their data, right? Like there are like a lot of like data sources out there, and it's like usually what happens is that like a lot of times some of the data marts or data warehouses, tables, views, etc., right? It's either deprecated, right? It's no longer maintained, and people are still using them, right? And nobody really has an idea of like where they came from, like what the actual business requirements were. So there's like a lot of like kind of like continuation, like propagation of like a bad data or deprecated, right, old data, stale data that goes around with the whole like data democratization. So I think it's like very critical that the data governance like practices and strategies are in place. Like, in order for it to be truly like data driven, I think that's key going forward in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree. Processes, data governance, that is big. And it's funny you say that. I even did a video on that about data governance because of how important it is. So that's great.
Awesome.
And then the other thing, just to expand though, we get that the whole data governance, the lineage, which I think now we're starting to see a huge demand in data catalog because people want to understand what's out there. But with data quality, you mentioned too, getting the data cleansed, but speed. Would you agree that also getting the data cleansed and speed are also important because is business asking for the data quicker and faster nowadays? Or is it still the same demand, you would say? What would you?
Yeah, I think for sure. And I think that also like plays hand in hand with the whole like all the organizations trying to be like data driven and democratizing their data. A lot of like the end users, business users expect the data to be available like right away, which like they don't like know the process involved in like getting, ingesting that data, right? And modeling it, architecting it so that they could use it in a nice like format or nice like structure on the back end. So I do see that a lot. Like a lot of times, like you'll have like some business users, make a request. I need to report on this data like right away, or I know it's like out there. Like I know this like source system somewhere is like ingesting it or is using it, right? And like they just don't know the process of being like us having to like actually like build out the pipeline and like design that for them. So I do see that a lot, and the often case is like as part of like the whole agile movement, right? We try to be agile, like we try to like iterate on the process, right? But I think data quality, like as a whole, like it just takes a lot of iterations, right? It takes a lot of like time, and it takes a gradual process where you improve upon it like over and over. And I think from like the end user's perspective, right? I could see like why they could get like frustrated, like they see like data quality issues. But yeah, I mean, it's just something that I guess that the expectations need to be set with, right? And just kind of work with the end users, right? Maybe even the like front end, like developers, right? To make sure the process, right? And the strategy is installed like org wide, so that as an org, right? You have a better quality data across the entire life cycle of data.
And Max, you bring up some great points too, and that goes to to my last question about the trends, right? Where do you see data engineering is going and supporting organizations, and what are the future challenges? And as you describe the challenge especially with business not understanding IT, do you see maybe in the future more tightly collaboration around IT and business? Is there a way they can collaborate better? Would that alleviate some of the challenges you mentioned about they not understanding the process? They're wanting the data tomorrow. There was a way to collaborate. Would that help speed things along and maybe provide more clarity? Just curious on those future challenges you would call it or see.
Yeah, I think in terms of like collaborations, I think that's just like depends on case by case. Ideally, I think in terms of like any data like projects or data products, right? The end users are like who's actually going to use the product, right? So it's always important to collaborate from the beginning, right? Set the expectations, know exactly what kind of requirements and what kind of like insights or analytics they're looking to do, right? Out of the actual end product. So that's always important. And in terms of additional like trends and challenges, I think it's always going to be like there's going to be new systems, new types of data, right? And it's just the volume and velocity, all of it, right? It's just only going to grow with time, right? And more and more organizations, right, will want to leverage that, right? Gain insights out of it. And it just adapting to those changes, right? Different systems, tools. That's going to be, I think, the main challenge we're going to see going forward as well.
Yeah, Max, I totally agree. More new systems, more data. We know data is gold coming in, right? It's like, yeah, just bam, 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 data. Yeah, I definitely see that. Well, Max, I really appreciate you taking the time on a Saturday to join me and talking data more, providing those insights, the value of a data engineer, the value you guys bring to an organization to be data-driven, some of the trends and challenges you see. Really appreciate you taking the time, Max.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Max. Well, for the folks that don't know Max Kang, please connect with him on LinkedIn. You'll see his URL connected below. Again, Max, thank you again for taking the time and hanging with me on Talking Data and More. Take care.
Awesome. Take care. Bye.
All right, guys.